Our why is clear. We envision a society where us and them become we. Mistrust and fear create conflict and limit the human development of all people, shaping the imperfect world in which neighbors fear neighbors. People can't give their best at work, and public places are unsafe for many, and the quality of all of our lives is affected. Getting to We offers a transformative approach to building and embracing a common humanity toward greater human connectivity. We do this with theater arts and visual media, women's social trust retreats, and our learning resources. Now, more than ever, we need to be better humans for other humans. We need gender solidarity as a catalyst for social trust. We need enough of us together, carrying all of us forward. We've started something special. Now we are ready to expand our work and our impact with you. Let's keep the conversation going.
Welcome, everyone, from wherever it is that you are joining us, whatever part of the country or world, and whatever time zone. Want to just invite you all to say hello as well. So if you would drop in the chat where you are hailing from this afternoon or this morning, wherever you're joining us from. We'd love to hear from you and know where you are, and greet the rest of the folks who are here. Awesome. Hello and welcome to Becoming Better Humans speaker series. My name is Erika Merritt, and I have the pleasure and privilege to serve as Vice President of Thought Leadership and Strategy with Getting to We. We are extremely glad that each of you are here to join in this conversation today. In a moment when division and polarization dominate the public conversation, we are gathering here to do something different, to ask how we can build connection across difference, how we can become the kind of leaders and neighbors our communities actually need. And that question is at the heart of Getting to We. And it is exactly what our guest has spent the last 20 years or so working on. Before we go there, I want to invite you all, if you are not already a part of the Getting to We community, we would love to have you join us. You can subscribe to our newsletter. It is free. In a world where so many things have become subscriptions, our newsletter is free, and we like to think that it's valuable in terms of the content. We promise not to clutter your mailbox with too many emails. It will be well worth it. Want to ask you, if you haven't already, to switch to speaker view. It's the best way to make sure that you are getting the catbird seat, if you will, to see both Julian and I in our conversation. And we want to remind you that this conversation is for you. And so we hope that you will drop questions in the chat along the way. If something resonates with you, we'd love to hear about it in the chat. And our Getting to We team members will be keeping an eye on that as we go along. So by all means, feel free uh, to participate in the conversation in that way initially. And there will come a point in our conversation where we will pull in questions from the chat. So your question might be a part of today's interview. Well, without any further ado, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing all of you to Julian S. Newman, who is author, founder, a CEO, and I suspect he will tell us one of his proudest accomplishments is being a girl dad. Julian is the founder of Culture Creative and the FutureCast Foundation, and he is the inaugural Anthem award-winning and Inclusion Leader of the Year, which so cool. He shares this distinction with Trevor Noah, who is also one of my favorites. His thought leadership has been featured in many publications that we know and newest vehicles that we're familiar with. So Forbes Magazine, Fox News, NPR, and PBS affiliates. And his work has reached more than 100,000 people worldwide through his clients, including organizations like Google, UN Women, Leo Burnett, and Michigan State University. What many people may not know about Julian, and I'm a film buff, so I find this to be particularly cool, is that he is also a film school and all MBA graduate with credits as an actor, a writer, a director, and a producer. And I think that that creative sensibility comes through in everything that he does. His debut book, Beautiful Together: How to Become a Better Leader and Bridge Builder, is a field manual for building genuine connection across difference through practice, right? Not just theoretically, but through practice. And so, Julian, welcome
Well,
and
thank
thank
you
you
so
for
much.
joining us.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Deborah, and everybody. Thank you so much for being on the call today. I'm super excited to be with you and to have this important conversation. So happy to be here with you.
Awesome. So why don't we start? So you mentioned Girl Dad is in your bio.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I know about you is that your four daughters were a major part of your inspiration to begin work in this space.
Hmm.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, super proud girl dad. I think that in on my dad's side of the family, all there were always boys first. And so I didn't really anticipate mentally having girls at all. I never thought, hey, I'm going to have daughters. I always thought I was just going to have sons. And so one of the things I like to say to people is that having daughters, I think, made me a better parent, a better man, and a deeper person because it forced me to be able to get outside of myself and to be able to experience the world from a different vantage point. And I really believe that so much of our conversation, the book Beautiful Together, is really connected to all of that. But the catalyst behind getting into this work is I grew up in Northern California and lived there for a majority of my life. And then I moved to the Midwest. And my daughters were really young at the time. My older daughters were really young. And moving to the Midwest, everything was very different culturally, and they were experiencing racism, overt racism at school in ways that I didn't know anything about. My father grew up in a segregated South, and so we talked a lot about his experience with racism growing up. Running from the police, being in the balcony, colored water fountains, et cetera, et cetera. So my understanding with racism was it was an episode every once in a while, something would jump off in my life that I experienced. It was geographic. My dad talked about his experience, but it was also history. The civil rights movement, conversation that we had in our family growing up. And so when I moved to the Midwest, racism wasn't an episode. It wasn't geography. It wasn't history. It was right here, right now, all the time. And so, in my desire and intention to advocate for my girls, I kind of fell into this space. And so, for me, the work, the book, everything that I do in this lane is really a labor of love because I want to help create a world that I want them to live in. And so, it was kind of an accidental genius, situation in terms of, man, I got to do right for my girls. And along with that, something pretty amazing happened out of that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
It sort of tracks for me in that the folks who do this work it's personal,
Mhm.
right? They tend to do it from a place of purpose. And there's something about it that they connect to and that matters for them. It's more than just work.
Mhm.
So you identify four keys to bridge building.
Mhm.
Can you tell us what they are and why they matter?
Okay. They're learning, living, leading legacy. And so the reason why I think those things are important is because all of us on this call, everyone who's going to be watching this video later on YouTube, has been to a conference, they've been to a workshop, they've been to a gathering, a teaching of some type. And so what happens is we get new information. Oh man, the information's great. Oh, I'm inspired by that. Oh, that's so good. But what happens is when we get the conference, handbook, or the back in the day we used to get binders. All right. What happens? We get our binder, we get our stuff, we put it on the shelf, we look at it, but that's where it ends. And so we learn new information, but we've not incorporated that new learning into our leadership. And the reason why that hasn't happened is because we've learned something, but we've not lived what we've learned. So none of us, I saw somebody on, Lisa is traveling from Cleveland to Chicago today. Thank you for being here, Lisa. Now, Lisa wouldn't get on a plane, and if she knew the pilot had only gotten their pilot's license via YouTube videos or webinars. So even though they had the right information, they've not put that information into practice. So it's just learning, it's not living. And so we have to sit there and say, okay, how do I take the learning and actualize it and putting into living? So at the end of every chapter of Beautiful Together, and pick up the book, but there is a rubric, the learning, living, leading legacy. So when I learn new information and I put it into practice with living, then I elevate my leadership and I live a different legacy. And so, if we practice not only what we preach, but what others have preached, then we have authority that's connected to our insight. If we have insight without authority, authority comes from lived experience through practice, through actually having experience doing the thing. It comes with rootedness, it comes with weight. And so it's important for us as we wrestle with these ideas to bring our wrestling into our actions because that's where the magic happens. So I'll say it again, learning, living, leading legacy. If I learn new information and I live what I learned, I put what I learned into living practice, it elevates my leadership and I can leave a different legacy.
Thank you. Lisa has assured us that she is at a rest stop,
Okay. Oh,
not in the midst of
okay.
driving, and that she
All
is
right.
committed to the practice part of
Okay.
what you're describing. Yeah, I think about this idea of like knowing something in our bones,
Hmm.
right? Versus knowing about something
Hmm.
as you're saying that, right? I think that piece of theoretical knowledge and the space between the theory and the practice piece and the discovery of that,
Hmm.
right, is so important. You know, for any of us who have experienced formal education, there's what you learn about in a particular context, and then there's the reality of doing the thing, and there's space in between those things that you don't discover until you practice.
Put into practice, and I would say practice under pressure. So,
Hmm.
we talked about theater, we talked about acting, we talked about film when we were, getting together before this official conversation. So, if you are going to play a part or role, particularly on stage, once the play starts, you don't get to stop and go, you know what, hold on a second, look, we're going, right? And so what happens is if you've learned your lines well and you've moved it from your brain or your memory into your body, even if you're under pressure or stress, you'll operate out of that practice. And so I think a lot of times when it comes to these conversations about race, racism, about inclusion, about equity, we have this theoretical knowledge, but when it's put under pressure and that pressure requires us to invest something of value, then it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And so our practice, our living, our leadership is deepened when we invest, and now we can operate effectively even in times of pressure. And so this can't be something we simply believe, but this has to be something that moves into our behavior, because transformation happens with action, not just the understanding intellectually of elevated ideas.
That, thank you for that. So tell us, why beautiful together? What does it mean? What does it mean to you? What does it look like? What does it feel like?
So beautiful together. So I'm gonna share a quick story. My daughters love this story. I mean, love this, but they really hate it. It's one of those things where they'll talk to their kids about, and they'll probably practice this, right? So with a multiplicity of daughters, there are times where they're not in ideological agreement. Okay, that's a very elevated way of saying folks are arguing. So what happens
Yes.
is one daughter comes to me and says, "Hey, Dad, she did this, she said this, she took this, whatever." So we have some conflict. So what happens is if I engage the daughter number one and try to solve the problem, what happens is after it's solved and daughter number one goes back, daughter number two comes back with the issue that she has about the issue. And she's one is going to come back to two and say, well, Dad said this, even if it isn't an accurate depiction of what I said, right? So we got all kinds of problems. So the rule was that you can't bring up an issue unless you have the other violator in the room. So sister one and two have to be present, or one, two, three, and four have to be present. Okay, so you have to be present. If we can't solve the issue and they're still acting up, so what I would do is I would have them hold hands, look at each other, and they'd sing this song. And here's the song I would have them sing. And now that they're older, I still mess around and try to make them like, Dad, we're not doing that now. But here's the song I would have them sing. I love my sister loves me. I love my sister loves me. And I would have them hold hands and kind of go around in circles. And what would happen is by the end, they would be laughing and falling all over each other, and it would be a beautiful reunion. The reason why that was effective is because it was a song to remind them of what we're really doing here. The issue isn't the issue. The fact that we're family is the most important thing. Why beautiful together? At the end of the Eye of a Dream speech, Dr. King ends with this extraordinary crescendo where he talks about the possibility of a beautiful future. I think that each and every one of us, no matter where we all want to live in the reality of a beautiful future. And so when we were sitting there throwing names around, I thought, I want a name that makes you feel good. I want there to be a name that makes you want to smile. And no matter who you are, whether you have a doctoral understanding of human relationships, or you are just stepping into this maybe as a new language learner, there's an opportunity for you to connect. And I think that the goal of our leadership, I think the goal of bridge building is to create the opportunity for something beautiful, something transformative, something inspirational, something engaging, something powerful. And so beautiful together to me is an aspirational picture of the possibility of us being together as humans. And that's why we chose the name.
Yeah, it is. It's an exquisite title. It does. Well, I can speak for myself. It definitely evokes something powerful for me, right? And you imagine what would that look like and what would that feel like? And it connects deeply to why getting to we exists, right? This idea of turning us and them into we. So I love that. Tell us about this phrase, cultural bandwidth. What does it look like to have it? What does it look like to not to have it? Uh, Tell us about that.
So, for those of us that are old enough to remember early internet, right? So early internet, you had a modem, you had AOL online, you had all these kind of different things, and so
I can hear the noise as you're
yeah,
talking. The
exactly,
con-
and so that noise. So during that time period, you could do three things. You could check your email, you could surf the pixelated web, or you could talk on the phone. All right. That was pretty much all the things you could do. And you could do only these three things, and you can only do one of those three things at a time. And the reason why you can only do these three things at a time is because the bandwidth was very narrow. So the narrowness of the bandwidth limited the options that were available to us. But as the bandwidth has increased, we have more options that are available to us. We have the opportunity to do this where folks are in Shaker Heights traveling to Chicago. Lisa, I'm sorry, I thought you were on a plane. I'm glad that you're on the rest stop here. And so we have the opportunity to do what we're doing right now. Why? Because the bandwidth is increased. The larger the bandwidth, the more options are available to us. And that's true not just of the internet, it's true of culture. Bandwidth is connected to our ability to navigate difference individually, collectively, as a community, at home, or as an organization or a company. Companies or organizations have a narrow bandwidth, they don't navigate difference as well. Those that have a larger bandwidth, they navigate differences very well. I'll give you an example. We were working with an organization that was a multinational shipping company, and they were hiring women in a way that they had never done before. So it was a revolutionary move that they were stepping into this new season. And then when asked, "Hey, how are you going to navigate a different atmosphere? How are you going to navigate this new manager that's coming in that's a woman?" And the response was, "She's going to be just fine when she becomes one of the guys." Now, that response is very, very revealing, right? One, I'm happy that she's here, but in order for her to be here, she has to assimilate into being like us. And so, what that simple statement illustrated is narrow bandwidth because we want difference, but as long as the difference is not different, then we're all good. The larger the
Can
bandwidth,
look different sometimes, but not be different.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what we have to do is we have to take practical steps to be able to open up the bandwidth so we can navigate difference at a higher level.
Yeah. Can you what might that look like? So if this organization had been operating with this widened cultural bandwidth, what how might the response have sounded different? I just think it's helpful for people to think
So,
practically
so you're
about,
saying, so the question is, okay, that you gave me an answer that was narrow bandwidth.
yeah,
What would be a response that would be larger?
sure.
I think a response that would be expanded bandwidth might say, so how are you going to do this? Well, one of the things that we're going to do is as we bring these new hires in and we bring this new manager in, we want to ask questions to find out what would be the best fit for them. So I think one of the things that we do is we make assumptions based on experience that we've never had. And as a father, that's happened so many times. Oh my goodness. Where I've made an assumption based on an experience that my daughters are having that I've never had. So what happens is organization can say, okay, we're going to make this space, or we're going to make this initiative that's going to be woman focused or centered. But the people that are making the decision about that centeredness are not women. So they're making assumptions based on experience that they never had. So I think one of the ways that we expand our cultural bandwidth is we ask questions from a perspective that is not our own.
Yeah. Yeah, you're saying that makes me think about the difference between self-centered perspective taking, right? Where we're looking at something through our own lens of experience versus other-centered perspective taking, which says, I need to look at it through the eyes of these other people and not just imagining, right? But you're saying inquiry, right? Applying curiosity, asking questions of people to better understand what's different for them and what it is that they might need, and how does that shift the entire cultural environment of that organization. I always think about, when one person leaves or enters, right, it's the environment shifts or changes. And so what does that mean for everyone as those women are coming into the organization, and
Mm-hmm.
how might they all need to shift or change? And this also sounds a bit like a build it before you need it
Mm-hmm.
kind of scenario too. So what are those things that maybe are existing in that cultural environment that are not inclusive practice that you need to address even before? Because I think there's a way. This reminded me of a story. So I had I was doing a project with a municipality, and I was having a conversation with the fire chief in that city. And one of the things he talked about was really wanting to recruit more women and more people of color onto the to be firefighters. And at some point, so we're talking and we're talking about this and we're talking about the challenge of it. And I asked him, what does he think it would be like if, these women or these people of color started in the fire department? Like, he got his druthers, he got these people, and they started in the fire department as it is today. And he paused for a minute before he answered me. And I think he, was really thinking about this and really imagining what it would be like. And he said to me, not great. And, I said, tell me more about that. And he talked about like some of the banter that exists in the predominantly white male fire station today, and how that might need to shift. And so the conversation I had with him was, I think you should start now, right? So, because what you don't want is the reason for the shift to be these people who are now coming into the space, right? Which I think would build resentment, right? It's like, what does what do respectful interactions look like now, even in the absence of these other people? Because the other people, it's like, can you tell a sexist joke if there are no women in the room, right? Or can you, like, the idea is those are things you probably don't want to be saying anyway, no
Mm-hmm.
matter who's in the room,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so how do you start to build that culture even before you're inviting people into it? I think we focus a lot, to your point, on the recruitment of people and not as much on what their actual experience will be in that space.
Yeah, for sure.
You talk about in your book the difference between, and this feels like a good segue, like the difference between temporary fixes and lasting belonging. What's the difference, and why do you think so many organizations might stop before they get to the lasting belonging?
Because it's costly, you know. It's in order to shift the system, it takes time, it takes work, it takes strategy. Uh, it takes pressure, it takes pain. It means you have to subtract some things in order to add some other things. Going back to what you talked about in terms of the firehouse, I'm going to have to shift what is more maybe natural to me, what I've been conditioned to do. It's a sacrifice to make space. So it's easier to do surface work rather than system work. System work is under the ground, surface work is right up top. I can pull the weeds, the top of the weeds, but if I don't remove the roots, nothing ultimately changes. The foundation of the house is cracked and broken, but if I paint the outside, it might look better, but it really hasn't been changed. I think one of the reasons why you see kind of this cycle of dysfunction when it comes to race relations in the United States is because we've never addressed the foundation of the house. We put maybe ornaments, in the yard, or we've maybe painted a couple things, but we've not really addressed the foundation. And so I think one of the reasons why, going back to your question specifically, we stop before we get to belonging because it's too costly, it's too difficult, it's too hard. It means we have to change habits. It means we have to change the way that we think of what we do. We have to make room. And so making room is hard. And if we think about even relationships one-on-one, if we have been, friends or in a marriage and a family over the course of time, conflict is a part of it. And so, when I think about my daughters, there's been a lot of conflict over the years. But if the thing that allows us to press through the conflict is the bond that we have outside of the conflict. You talked about building it before you need it. I think it's important for us before we talk about the system, before we talk about the transformation, let's just talk about humans. And so one of the things that we like to do when we're working with organizations is we want to connect people, not just department to department, but we want to connect them as human beings. Because when I see somebody as a person, it changes the way that I engage with them. It changes the way that I disagree with them. It changes the way that I listen to them. The bond precedes gives us the opportunity to be able to navigate the barriers well. And so we don't follow through because it's hard. It's like you sit there and you think about, we're in June now. Okay, half the year has gone. In January, what did people do? They went to the gym and they had their new outfits on. They got their new shoes on and new tights and whatever, right? They got their gear and their technology and what have you. For those of us that go to the gym, you go the first week in January, you can't even move hardly because there's so many people up in there. But by
Yeah.
day 20, January 20, it's back to normal. Is it because the people didn't believe in fitness and all those nutrition? No, it just got hard on day 20 because they said it's 19 days. So if you talk to people, they'll say it's 19 days. On the 20th day, everybody goes back to stasis. And so organizations are the same way. I believe, but I don't know if I want to do the things that are required to actually get what I say that I want. So because I want the result without making the investment, how about I just make it cosmetic? And so if I make it cosmetic, it looks like I've done the work without actually making the investment.
Yeah. Window dressing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I just want to say out loud to all of you, we want to pull you in the conversation soon. So if you have questions that you want to ask of Julian, please drop them into the chat. We want this to be our collective conversation. I mean, I could talk to Julian all day, but I've had a chance to talk to Julian. I think I can still talk to Julian after today. So I want to make sure that you all take advantage of this opportunity right here and right now to ask your own questions. Don't be shy. Drop them in the chat. You talked about this idea that all of us have something in
Mm-hmm.
your book. All of us have something. None of us have everything. how do we help people to actually believe that about themselves? And especially in spaces and places where hierarchy is present, which to some extent is everywhere.
Mhm.
Even in organizations that like to think of themselves as flat, there are power structures.
Mhm. Well, I think it goes back to humanity. Okay, so we all have a contribution, and the need for your contribution and my contribution requires us to be connected in community. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to, leave the office, or we have to leave the whatever, and sing songs on the way home together. Okay, it doesn't mean that we have to hang out all the time, but I do believe that we have to make the people that we're working with, or even the people that we disagree with, we have to make them humans and not things. And so we live in a world that makes people products or matter. So, for example, you go to the supermarket and you see the checkout aisle. You can check out yourself. So you don't have to engage with anyone. If you are listening to music, or you're listening to a lecture and you got your earbuds in, you don't have to engage with humans. And so we have a world that's conditioned to anti-community rather than community. And so before we can deal with the problem, we have to validate the presence of the person. There's something that in a book called Third Space Leadership. It's elevating the conversation beyond the points of polarization to solve problems and make progress. Most of the things that we're dealing with are many of the challenges that we're dealing with in society and culture in the country and in the world deal with polarization. Well, part of the polarization is I've dehumanized the other person on the other side of the argument. And so in order for me to transcend that, the first thing I have to do is I have to recognize that the other person or people on the other side of the idea, or the initiative of the argument, they're people too. And so I have to validate their opportunity to make a meaningful contribution. I do that by setting the argument or the issue aside and connecting as human beings. So we have to elevate the conversation, and we elevate the conversation by trying to find commonality, but the commonality is preceded by making space for their humanity and then making space for mine.
How do you
I know I
do
said a
that?
lot right there.
Oh,
I know I said a lot
yeah.
right there. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you do that through anger and through frustration, or through maybe even cynicism? With the belief that, like, for people in this moment who are really struggling to believe that something else is possible, how do you like lean into that other person?
Well, I think it takes willing parties. All right. So what I just described is willing parties. Even if those parties in disagreement, they are coming to the table to try to find an acceptable solution or commonality. Third space requires this group or person on the side of the polarity and this group or person on the side of polarity to say, okay, well, let's try to find a solution. Because a lot of the things that happen is we're not trying to solve problems and make progress. We're trying to argue stuff. We have to move beyond the argument into action that provides a solution to make progress. I'm not trying to convince you to believe like me. I'm not trying to convince you to be me. I'm just trying to work with you so we can solve whatever the thing that we need to solve. I'm looking at, gerrymandering, and looking where Donna says uh, the reasons that gerrymandering is presented the regionality in the U.S. with all the regions people stayed in states over the decades since the civil rights legislation change was imposed and not personally applied. Man, there's so much to say about that. I guess what I would say goes back to what I talked about in terms of foundationally. If we don't address the foundation, then we are going to lean back into what the foundation is. All right. And that's true of relationships, that's true of nations, that's true of houses, building, whatever. We have to address the roots of the tree in order for the branches of the tree to grow right. And so I believe that part of our challenge is we have yet to be courageous enough to address the roots. Looks
You
like,
see Lisa's question as
yeah, I see
well.
it. Um, okay. So a bit about the toll of spending time where dehumanizing, particularly extremist politics is the norm. Okay, so here's what I would say, and this is true, this is something that I practice, right? So we have to make sure that we that are trying to bring health to unhealthy systems and scenarios, situations, society, that we stay healthy ourselves. And it's easy to allow the toxicity of the environment to make us sick. So what we have to do is we have to disengage for a season. All right. So we cannot be binging all the latest news information. We can't be on social media, doom scrolling in the middle of the night. We have to sit there and say, okay, hold up. In order for me to bring health to things that are unhealthy, I have to be healthy. I cannot allow the poison to get in me and make me poisonous. There's we talked about film. I used to love comic books growing up, and I actually still do. There's a character in DC named Bizarro, and Bizarro was the opposite of Superman. So instead of having super, heat vision, he had cold vision. Instead of seeing, super, he had like super hearing. I mean, all this different. Everything was flipped. So what happens often is that we responding in injustice, responding to dehumanization, responding to hatred, whatever, we can find our hearts hardening and want to hate the haters and dehumanize the dehumanizers. And what happens is we become a version of them. And I believe I've coined it, don't become Bizarro Superman. And so, in order for me not to become like them and dehumanize the dehumanizers, I have to disengage from the crazy and I have to put myself in environments that are going to be restorative to me. That those are people, that are places. One of my restoring places is I go to the gym. Another one of my restoring places, I go to the movie theater. Another one of my restoring places is I like to act and create and write. And so part of my detox is trying to create even out of places of pain or hardship. And so just know that history is on our side. Okay? History is, you can't do bad things in civilizations and expect those civilizations to succeed into perpetuity. You can't. History tells us that that's just the case. But going back to what you're asking, we have to, people talk about self-care and all that other stuff, and self-care isn't just putting cucumbers on your eyes, whatever. And if that's your deal, then hey, yo, that's awesome. But what I am saying is we have to regularly employ restorative practices as we are trying to build bridges, bring restoration, and make the world a beautiful place. That's really key.
Yeah. Debbie's asking if you'll
Oh,
tell us more about the shapes. So
uh-huh.
the triangle, the square, and the circle from your book.
Okay, so triangle, circle, square. All right. So triangle is it's a worldview. Okay. So when we look at conflict, when we look at bridge building, we often approach the issue the wrong way. Okay. So a triangle is a mindset that's a conqueror. Okay. So in order the conflict, I'm going to conquer the conflict. I'm going to vanquish my opponents, and I'm going to be a person of conquest. The person that I love to use or talk about in relation to that, for those of us that are aware of the Marvel universe, would be Thanos or maybe even Vader. Okay. People that say, listen, I'm not looking to solve, to try to create understanding really, because the ends justify the means of whatever I want. Okay. And so when we address conflict that way, we're not building a bridge. A square speaks of competition. In our society, we love competitors. We love Jordan. We love Tom Brady. Victor Wembanyama. The finals are starting tonight. Sorry, Cleveland Cavs fans.
Hey, no.
Didn't go very well the other day. That was crazy. Anyway, sidebar. So, but the tagline, the thinking process when it comes to competitors is, we're winning at all cost. It's a dog eat dog world. And so it doesn't matter if you treat people inhumanely, whatever, as long as you win the game at the end, it's all good. But circle people are transcendent. They transcend those things. They create understanding, because in a triangle, there's some at the top and there's folks at the bottom. In a square, there's people up here and there's folks down there. But in a circle, we're all connected in community. If you watch theater in the round, everybody is really relatively in the same position of space. It creates community. And so if we look at people like Nelson Mandela, we look at people like Dr. King. We look at people like Fannie Lou Hamer, and those individuals, those are circle, they're transcenders, those people that build bridges. And not only do they build bridges of understanding, they help create transformation from the inside out. They inspire us, they empower us, they make us feel better and stronger and more empowered to make a difference. And so, going back to the question about how do we deal with some of the toxicity, I think we learn, we read the stories, we listen to the speeches, the voices of those that went on before us, our predecessors, our ancestors, those that have created opportunity and peace and revolution and love and beauty in generations prior to us. And so, one of the things we're working on something different. We're adding a new shape, and it's the rectangle. Okay, so us conquerors, competitors. The next one we're going to talk about is comforters, people that want to just keep everything and stay on the couch of their culture or comfort zone and not do anything outside of that. And so we're working on some like a whole training module in relation to that. But if we're going to be bridge builders, we have to be transformers that transcend the crazy and bring beauty to it and in the midst of it.
Thank you for that. You talk about the concept of civility,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a word that can land differently for different people, right? For some people, it sounds like respect and restraint. For others, it might feel like a way to avoid hard truths or to protect comfort. How do you think about civility, and the type that still allows for real change? I know that that's how you're thinking about it, and for accountability as well.
Hey, listen, civility doesn't mean that we don't talk about real stuff. And so, going back to my relationship with my daughters. So, I have adult daughters now, and they have their own ideas, they have their own stuff, and I've had girls in the teenage thing, and I'm gonna do what I want. And so here was the rule. I just said, listen, and I still say this is something that we still practice. I don't mind you disagreeing with me, but you're going to disagree respectfully. No matter who you are, or how old you get, or how accomplished you are, you're still my kid, and I'm still your dad. And so that I'm not minimizing your adultness, I'm not minimizing your ideas, I'm not minimizing your brilliance, and I'm even make space for the fact that I don't know, I could be completely wrong. But we're gonna be respectful in our disagreement. We're not going to we're not going to use our disagreement as a reason for being relationally wrong, even if we are, statistically or informationally correct. And so I think civility is in the context of organizations. I think in the context of family, I think in the context of nonprofit organizations or in our community, we can talk about the hard thing, but we're going to talk about the hard thing in a respectful way. And so avoidance doesn't help us. Avoidance actually just kicks the can down the road, and adding interest to the issue that comes back again. And so I'm looking at what Teresa asked, and I think it's connected is what does the culture belonging feel like? I think the manifestation is multifaceted. So I don't know if there's a one size fit all that you can apply to every situation, except for the opportunity for people to be heard. And I think if we create space for the opportunity for people to be heard and for people to be seen, then everything builds from there. And there have been times where I've gotten it wrong as a dad, like, oh man, I made an assumption. And some of it is funny, some of it isn't as funny. There are times where I have talked to people and recognizing, oh, wait a minute, I'm manifesting my own bias here. Because I think one of the ways that we minimize our own bias is acknowledging that we have it. In order for us to recognize that, to minimize our blind spots is recognize that we have them. And
Yeah.
so what does belonging feel like? Where we make space for people to feel heard, and we create opportunities for people to be seen. One of my, I don't say favorite movies, but back in the day, there's a movie came out, you may have seen, it's called Avatar. And in Avatar on planet Pandora, the Na'vi, these blue people, and a lot of that movie was taken, you can look at it from a colonization standpoint from the information they got from indigenous folks and people on the continent of Africa. But for sake of conversation, I'll set that aside. But when they greeted one of their brothers or sisters, they would say, I see you. I see you. And so what does belonging look like? Belonging looks like, hey, I hear you. Belonging looks like, I see you and I make space for you. And I think if we were to sit there and say, okay, can I be heard? Can we be seen? And can we make space? I think those three entities or those three values applied to any organization created opportunity and a bridge to belonging.
Yeah, thank you for that. There are a couple other things in the chat. So some of them are comments. I don't want to lose this question from Jess about some of the change leaders that have influenced your perspective and your work. Are there people that come to mind for you?
You know what? I'm gonna say somebody that you guys have never heard of, and I'm gonna talk about my parents. Leon and Gloria Newman. And so, my dad grew up in the segregated South. My mom is from Louisiana. Her family grew up in California. And so, my father and my mother, he was in the Marines. They got married in Southern California in a very small four-square church near San Diego. And my father wanted us to live a different experience as Black children than he lived. So he was very intentional about where we lived and what churches we went to. We were the first African American family in this church that was in Sacramento that became diverse over time. And so what that gave me is the opportunity to live in a lot of different contexts. I was in a white world in some respects, and then I was in my neighborhood. So I like to tell people, for those of us old enough to remember the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, I lived both Will and Carlton at the same time. And so I think that me being in the neighborhood, us going to the church, right across the street, we had the Ortizes, and there were a Mexican family that spoke Spanish, and they would come over to our yard, and we would go over to theirs, and we would like trade food. I remember the first enchilada I had, or tamale I had, was from the Ortizes. And they had a daughter. She was like in her teenage. She was a teenager. Her name was Becky, and I was like 8 years old, and I'm like, man, she's gonna be my girlfriend. That never happened. But the Ortizes. On the other side, we had Ray and Carol. They were Caucasian, and they had all these dogs, And I remember he was an EMT, and there was a time I had a medical emergency, and he helped me. On the other side, we had an African American family, and Alex was one of my buddies, and we went to school together. And so when I sit there and I think about where I've drawn some of this wisdom from, and I thank you for using the word wisdom. I'm just quoting you. I'm not saying I'm necessarily wise, but that comes from my parents. That comes from home. And so, they've never written books or they've never, done whatever. But when I think about all the stuff that I do, all the opportunities, I can get emotional thinking about this comes from my father, this comes from my mother, this comes from home, it comes from my grandma, it comes from my grandparents. And so it's an expression of the world that a little boy named Julian Newman grew up in. And I want the world to experience that. So man, I didn't expect to talk about that, but I'm just very grateful for them and what they've done for me and what they allowed me to be a part of in my life. So yeah.
Thank you, Julian, for
Mhm.
thank you for sharing a little bit of them with
Mhm.
us, and sharing yourself in that way. There are two questions, a question and a thought around the question is, how do we help white folks
Mhm.
like John, who's asking the question, let go of their loyalty to whiteness and be loyal to belonging? And then Debbie talks about the confusion between cultures of belonging with cultures of fit, and this idea of these, sort of baby boomer standards, who are still in these leadership roles. And I think when I think about the comment and the question, I just think about how do we make this idea of beautiful together
Mhm.
so compelling that people push themselves out of their comfort zone and what they know, and what they've been told is the standard or the norm,
Mhm.
to this other concept, this world that you are
Mhm.
imagining for your daughters, and the kind of future that you're hoping that we can create together.
Okay,
So
I'm
how
going
do
to
we
try
do
to
that? And tell us in a minute
yeah,
or less. No.
I'm going to try to go real quick, okay? So I'm going to try to go fast. Okay, the first thing I would say, John, I really appreciate you use the word white people and whiteness, because sometimes we combine those two. Whiteness is a thing that people, it's a belief system, okay? Whiteness basically says that a white person has more value than non-white people, okay? So that's really what whiteness employs. So how do we get people that have been conditioned whiteness and it's synonymous to their person to divest themselves of it? They have to experience a different way of life. Most people that you see on social media that happen to be white, that ascribe to whiteness, don't they work among, but they don't live among people that are different than them. So if you look at their the world is very homogenized. It's very segregated, but they have this awareness that just because I watch a television show or watch a movie or my favorite team is blah, 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 I have digital exposure to people of difference, but I don't have a human experience with that. And so I have to first address that. Remember, we talked about I address my blind spots to recognize that I have them. So why my white brothers and sisters have to recognize that whiteness is not them, it's a thing. It's like the face huggers in Alien. That's not me. That's something that was given to me, but I don't have to have it. So the first thing is I have to experience the world in a different way and divest myself from it. Um, and the second thing is, fit in belonging. I think it's important for us to recognize that some things need to be changed, some things need to be replaced, or we just need to have another option. We don't always need to sit there and say, you know what, please get me a seat at the table. Sometimes we just need to build our own table. You know what, please pick me. You know what, wait a minute, I'm going to pick myself. You know, if I'm going to deal with a situation that is white supremacist, or it is whiteness, meaning non-white people have less value than white people, then you know what? I'm not doing that. So I'm going to build my own firm. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to create my own a film company. You know, I'm going to go ahead and do my own thing, because I'm not going to wait around for somebody that thinks that I'm less than to try to bring me into the building or bring me into the room to make space for me. And so I think that there's a thing about, we have to have confidence. Those of us that are freedom fighters and bridge builders and beauty builders, we're people that say, nah, you know what? Let's figure out why we can build community amongst ourselves and create something different. I talked, and I know we're at time right now, but my youngest daughter, I took her to the black one of the museum. Went to the African American Museum, and I said, baby, I need you to understand something. She's like, what, Dad? I said, listen, you didn't descend from slaves. She's like, what do you mean? I said, you descended from people that were kidnapped. And I said, but prior to slavery, there were kings and there were queens and there were scientists and archaeologists and there were artists and there were amazing people. They were kidnapped for a season. And that was their circumstance, but that's not who they were. I said, if I understand that I come from people that preceded the kidnapping, it changed the way I feel about myself. And so if I sit there and look at myself through the lens of the dehumanizer, then I'm always going to dehumanize myself. I'm always going to sit back and look at, you know what, I'm less than, because they believe less of me. But I'm not going to look at them through the lens that they look at me with. I'm going to recognize that I'm powerful, I'm beautiful, I'm innovative, I'm creative, I'm transformative, I'm a bridge builder, and I'm a beauty maker. That's who I am. And so what I believe that we have to do is, yes, we need to engage. Yes, we need to sit there and have conversations. Yes, we need to be able to dialogue. We need to do all those things. But as we're doing that, we also need to be building something else, because sometimes the root of something is so corrupted that it can't be transformed without a whole lot of work. Sometimes we just got to build a new thing and plant a new tree and put together a new garden so all of us can eat together. So anyway, I know that we're at time, and I apologize for preaching, but I believe in this stuff with all my heart, and this is part of my life's work, and I bring my soul to it. So thank you so much for giving us a couple extra minutes for me to
Oh,
pontificate a little bit.
absolutely. I think you're getting some amens from the audience. Julian, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate all of your words, and we deeply appreciate the work that you continue to put into the world in service to us being beautiful together. And so I just want to remind everyone that Getting to We's mission is to build a learning community of advocates for we in the places where we work, live, worship, and play. And that Julian's work and this conversation are a beautiful example of that mission in action. You will all receive today's recording and additional resources as a follow-up to our time together. We encourage you to share it with someone that you think needs to hear the message. And, one of the things that I'll leave you all with is that there are times that this work can feel really lonely, and all of it can feel very big and daunting. And I think that when it feels that way, sometimes it's because we are thinking about it as our individual charge and not remembering that we are in it together, right? That we want to find the other people. We want to find those third spaces with those other humans that want to create something beautiful together. And those places do exist, whether they exist in our neighborhoods or whether they exist online or whether they exist in organizations that we're a part of or the community that we live in. We have to be willing to do the work and put forth the effort. And if you can't find what you're looking for, there's an opportunity to create it as well. which Julian spoke to. So I want to remind you that you can support Getting to We Always by making a tax-deductible donation. Any amount makes a difference and fuels conversations like this one. Again, thank you to Julian. Thank you to all of you. Until next time, we are yours in the spirit of we. Wishing you a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
All right, see you all.
Lighting up the darkness, turning fear into kindness. We have to step and repeat, turning us and them into we. Lighting up the darkness, turning fear into kindness.
Deb, you want to stop our recording?
Pardon me? Yeah.
Did you stop our recording?